5 years ago, an Islamist group known as Boko Haram sprung up in northern Nigeria, and more recently, on April 14th, they set off a bomb that killed 75 people, and they also kidnapped more than 200 female students from an all-girls school. Now, the reason why they kidnapped those girls is because they're against Western education, and they also wanted to sell the girls off as wives or slaves for about $12 each. They also argue that in times of war, it's absolutely okay to rape a girl that you basically kidnap and make your slave. So that's their justification for doing it. Now, the girls are still missing. Around 40 of them did successfully escape, but a good number of them are still missing, and their parents understandably are distraught, and they are urging the government and the local military to do everything possible to find them, but they're worried that the local authorities aren't doing enough. Now, the update to the story is that the US government has decided to get involved, and they said that they are going to aid Nigeria in finding these women, or these girls, I should say. So let me read you a quick statement from the State Department. They say, "We have been engaged with the Nigerian government in discussions on what we might do to help support their efforts to find and free these young women. We will continue to have those discussions and help in any way we can." Unfortunately, they weren't very specific. They also said, "We know Boko Haram is active in the area, and we have worked very closely with the Nigerian government to build their capacity to fight this threat."
So I think Boko Haram is actually the worst terrorist group in the world. And now they might not have killed the most people, they might not have caused the most damage overall, but both in their philosophy and in their actions, they have been as hideous as you could imagine. And consistently so. Even the name Boko Haram means Western education is sinful. Now, when they say Western education, what they're actually saying, of course, is any education. The fact that they are politicizing education by making it an outsider, a Western influence, is incredibly destructive to begin with. And this is, now when you take fundamentalist religion, which is what this is, and you take it to the extreme that they hate education, because then you might actually figure out what's going on in the world and then not believe the incredibly ignorant things that they are telling you, and then to say that that's sinful and that you should remain ignorant. Okay. And then they get into the kidnapping, the raping, the killing, the burning of young students for going to school. It doesn't get any worse than this. And I know that it is a real significant issue, one worth debating, as to whether the U.S. should get involved in things like this, because we can make a mess of it sometimes. But I vote yes. Look, I think our special forces are awesome in their power, and I think we'd actually help rather than hurt by using them in appropriate circumstances. And the people of that section of Nigeria are absolutely, literally terrorized by Boko Haram. And by the way, the people who are terrorized are Muslims, because they're operating in a Muslim area, and the Muslims in Nigeria are saying to the government of Nigeria, which is actually run by a Christian leader, saying, hey, you got to help us minority Muslims, because they're killing us here. This terrorist group, which is fundamentalist Muslim, is killing us. You've got to help us. So the U.S. government coming in there to help will actually have more, I believe, goodwill in the Muslim community overall. I know best intentions could lead to disastrous consequences, and I know that it's a worthy debate, but I would vote in favor of sending in the Navy SEAL Team 6 guys to deal with these Boko Haram guys and find out what's actually sinful.
234 girls abducted on April 15th. And starting in 2013, the raids on schools and children began, and they've killed more than 100 kids, murdered more than 100 children. The problem, and I agree with you, Cenk, that like this is, there's human tragedy across the world, and we can't do them all. This is one to do, for whatever reason that children. I mean, that's why it is. And if children are kidnapped by terrorists, it's something that we could look into. But the problem, of course, is that suppose everything works out, and we send some special forces in that has some intelligence, and they find these kids and they rescue all of them. It's a huge success, and they rescue these kids. Then what? Like, then the pressure on us to stay and help control that area exists, and the goodwill, or they just come back and they take the kids again. So
no, it's got to be project by project, and I know how hard that is, but we can't stay.
No, I agree with that.
Then you're inviting
But that's what we do. We go there and we stay. I mean, so it's a horrific situation, and you feel like so powerless looking at this story from the face of it. It's another example of how religion and specifically in patriarchy in general just holds back progress in the world. But to say, to counter your point of this is one thing we can go in there, I would just present as evidence, say, the last 75 years of U.S. foreign policy, since going back to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as a counter to that.
So Dennis, you're of course right about that, but my counter to that is that we never had good intentions in 90% of those cases. So when we went into Latin American countries, it was for the benefit of banana companies. It wasn't for the benefit of those Latin American countries or the American people. What if we were to do it right? And I know it sounds crazy, but we have in 10% of the cases we have, and it has been an overwhelming success. The Marshall Plan was such an overwhelming success that it led to tremendous goodwill for America for the next 50 years. Even as we did those coups and the other 90% of stuff that was actually terrible, we still had that goodwill because what a success the Marshall Plan, among other things like creating the United Nations, were. So. And the power of leaving is interesting, right? And you might not think about it this way, but if we send them to do this specific project, we're going to go get those 200 girls, kind of like Liam Neeson and Taken, we required a special skill set that is useful in these circumstances. And we send in the SEAL Team 6 guys, they get the girls back, and knock on wood, and then they leave, because then the message is, I don't think you want them to come back. Right? Because my guess is they're going to lose a good deal of Boko Haram guys in that operation. And then all of a sudden, bad guys throughout the world think, do we want to do something so bad that SEAL Team 6 comes in here? Maybe we ought to bring it down a little bit. And that's an interesting precedent to set. And I know that I'm being idealistic.
Yeah,
and I know it has not operated that way.
It doesn't operate that way, and it's horrific. What do you do? What can one do? But going in there, first, what the message you're going to send is going to cause collateral damage. That's what our foreign policies do. They cause blowback, so that's what happens. So when do you leave, and when you leave, what happens to those girls?
Yeah, and let me give it. Well, they go back to their families. That's a little bit easier, I think. But let me give another counterexample of the 10%. Now that I'm giving counterexamples, maybe even 20% of the time that we've done some significant good. Bosnia, and by the way, so we accrued a lot of bad will in the Muslim world through the Israeli-Palestinian situation, being stationed in Saudi Arabia. How I find it ridiculous that caused bad will, but that's not up for me to decide. It did cause bad will. The coups that we did in Iran and other places, how we've secretly manipulated those governments, but we got some of that goodwill back in Bosnia, and we have largely left, right? And people are, at least in that region, are still thankful to us. We came in, we did a project, we left. So it's not like it's never been done before. And so if we did, again, that's Muslims we're going to protect in northern Nigeria. So I think it's possible. I know it hasn't worked that way in a great majority of the cases, but if it did, wouldn't it be great?